May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. I remember the anonymous beggar in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, who regularly stood on the steps of the cathedral in the central plaza. His clothing was filthy and ragged, his head always looking down in a gesture of hopelessness as he held out his empty begging bowl to passers-by for some small donation that would enable him to eat that day. With no social safety net in Bolivia, high unemployment and rampant runaway inflation, begging was this unnamed child of God's only way to survive. And he was one of many, many unnamed beggars on the city streets of Santa Cruz, looking for some mercy. Well, in Mark 10, today's gospel reading, we meet another beggar whom Mark names, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. Earlier in Mark chapter 8, Jesus heals an unnamed blind man, the theme of blindness, both spiritual and physical, being central to the gospel accounts of Jesus, so often unrecognized as God's unique son. Bartimaeus was someone's child. He had a family and a background story. Marginalized by poverty and disability, this human being was yet known to God and to someone. Well, we find Bartimaeus unseen and unseeing, seated by the side of the road outside the town of Jericho, a rich and flourishing trade town celebrated for the palm trees adorning the plain. Just 13 miles east and northeast of Jerusalem, Jericho was therefore a good stopping point for pilgrims heading to the holy city, like Jesus and his disciples. Interestingly, this is the same Jericho where many years ago God accomplished another miracle, showing God's self to be the one true Lord, as in Joshua fit the battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, which you can read about in Joshua 6. Well, Bartimaeus hears the large crowds excitedly talking about Jesus, identified only by his hometown of Nazareth. And so this sidelined blind man has more spiritual insight than the milling multitudes. Bartimaeus repeatedly shouts for mercy from Jesus, the Son of David, which is a messianic term, significantly used only once in Mark's gospel and here. In his insistent faith, which refuses to be silent, Bartimaeus proclaims Jesus' true identity to the crowds who blindly accompany the Lord, yet do not recognize him. When Jesus finally calls the blind man, he is told, "Take heart, get up, Jesus is calling you." And Bartimaeus immediately obeys. He leaps to his feet. He discards his precious cloak spread out at his side on the ground, holding the coins he had collected. He leaves behind his cloak that is his one precious possession, the only thing that will keep him warm in the cold nights. So determined is he to come to Jesus, whom he knows is his one hope for healing and wholeness. Jesus asked Bartimaeus, "What do you want me to do for you?" allowing him the dignity of voicing his own desires. And this is the same question that Jesus asks his disciples, James and John, when they come to him to ask Jesus the Messiah for a favor. These two brothers show their blindness to the true calling of the Messiah as the suffering servant of Isaiah, who will suffer and die for the sins of the world. Well, James and John know exactly what they want. Power, glory with Christ when he comes into Jerusalem to his kingdom. How wrong those disciples were, seeking worldly greatness and success, just like the rest of the 10 disciples, showing themselves only to be blind outsiders. By contrast, Bartimaeus is the true insider, the model disciple who asks for nothing more than his sight to be restored so that he can move off the sidelines onto the road to life. Ultimately, this miracle story is more profoundly one of call. And that word call is repeated 3 times in Mark 10:49. This is a story of spiritual insight, confirmed as Bartimaeus also receives his physical ability to see. The unnamed rich young ruler we read about a few weeks ago, identified only by his many possessions, by which he also self-identified, turns sadly away from Jesus' invitation to leave everything and follow him. In contrast, Bartimaeus joyfully leaves everything, including his precious cloak, springs up and immediately follows Jesus on the road rather than turning away to go his own way. The Greek word hodos, meaning road, also signifies the way. And that is how later in Acts, Christians are identified as followers of the way, disciples of the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. Well, since Jericho is so close to Jerusalem, the new disciple Bartimaeus will soon be amongst the crowds who will stream excitedly into the holy city, shouting out for God to have mercy on them, to save them now, which is what the word Hosanna means. Although we physically may be able to see, I wonder if we, in some respects and at some times, may also be like Bartimaeus, blind beggars. We may not be asking for a handout so that we can eat today. Perhaps instead we are crying out for connection with God and with one another. We may be begging for meaning and purpose in this suffering world. We may long to be noticed, to be known and loved by the God who sees us and created us, to be made whole in our brokenness, whether physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual. Today, friends, we have wonderful news to share. Jesus is calling each one of us by name. In this time of pandemic, marginalization, and discouragement, we, like Bartimaeus, can take heart. We can get up off the bench where we've been sidelined for too long. Jesus is calling us. So how will we answer? This week, I invite you to ponder, where are you in your relationship with God? Are you seated on the sidelines, or are you all in? What is the one thing that you most want to ask Jesus for? And where are your blind spots that prevent you from fully receiving and enjoying God's tender love for you? Today, with Bartimaeus and the psalmist, may we taste and indeed see that the Lord is good. Take heart. Get up. Jesus is calling you.